everyone. It's Reed Mahalka from readaboutsex.com. How are you going to build your holiday QuaranTeams during COVID and third? How many waves of lockdown do we have? I'm with Marcia Baczynski of Ask Marcia B. You're teaching a workshop that I'm very interested in because Allison and I have been self-isolating pretty hard with some so 6 feet apart outside with masks, kind of social distancing, going to the store, once or twice a week, wearing masks. So I've been really starting to ache for hanging out with loved ones and friends more than closer than 6 feet.
Yeah.
And you're teaching a workshop on how to thinking about negotiating those things.
Yeah.
So I snapped up my ticket right away.
I saw that.
I'm coming because I'm also feeling like I'm at a loss for ways to talk about how do we talk about this.
Yeah.
Not just with my partner Allison, who I live with, but like people in general. Like how do I coordinate this? So I just want to say thank you for being available. I know you have a class, we're promoting your class, but like that you still talk to me after all these years means the most to me. And I'm curious about, like, for somebody who can't come to your class, what are some of your thoughts that you want to share with them? And then for everyone who can, we're obviously will like get more from you.
Yeah. So the class is on Thursday. It is going to be recorded. So if you can't make it live, still buy a ticket because you get the recording right away afterwards, and it will be available for you. So you definitely want to scoop that up. Yeah. So this is something that has been kind of, I mean, all of us have been dealing with this, right? And everyone that I've been talking with a lot of my clients about this. This is something I've been spending a lot of my coaching time with folks and supporting them around. So it's nice to be able to like offer it to folks, the stuff that I've been learning. And I think a lot of people are in the position that you're in, Reed, where it's like either they've been alone or they've been with that one person that they live with. And it's been complicated. And with the holidays coming up, people are trying to figure out, can I see my family? Or if I can't see my family, is there an alternative to just Zooming or freezing our butts off in the backyard? So, I wanted to put something together to kind of support people through. And the scenarios I'm working with, they're different, but they're kind of the same, right? We've got people who are trying to figure out if they can see their parents. They're trying to figure out if their kids can see their parents, like their kids are in college and their parents are, elderly. They're dealing with multiple housemates. They're dealing with open relationships. They're dealing with, blended families and co-parents and things like that. And the relationships themselves may have their individual challenges that can get really specific. But in terms of COVID, these are all basically the same kinds of questions. How do we get a safe, is it possible to safely pod up with people? And one of the biggest insights that I've had about this, and the thing that I've been working with people on and in my own situation, I have a housemate that I live with. I have a partner that I do not live with. My partner has started the pandemic with one housemate and now has two housemates. So we've had to negotiate that. We've had periods where we haven't been able to see each other for months at a time. Certainly two periods of several weeks and one that was 2 months. My housemate is dating and has successfully managed to date during COVID. Not very many people, one person in fact, but and my housemate also has a partner who's been a long-term poly partner. So that sounds really intimidating, except all of us are really conservative. So then what do you do with that? And the insight that we had was, if you go slow and people are really willing to make agreements for 2 to 3 weeks at a time, you can do short-term potting. And that's one of the many things I'll be talking about on the call. And it is not just, oh, we've decided to see each other for the weekend, so we're going to do that. There's a whole process to go through, and there's a set of conversations you need to have. And sometimes it involves, you mentioned going to the store. Sometimes it involves like not even doing that, not seeing people. But there are protocols you can put in place that can basically create a bubble before you create your pod. And so creating a sort of if you're not seeing anyone, you can't pick up COVID. And if the people that you're trying to see aren't seeing anybody, they can't pick up COVID. And if you quarantine for long enough, I mean, there's a reason lockdowns work. We're hoping to not go back to them on a global level, but you can do them short term to create situations where you can see people. And this is something that we've been working with, and it is tedious, but I've also developed some checklists, and I've developed some scripts, and I've developed some templates. So I hopefully can help folks make it less tedious by the tedium that I have gone through to make it work. Couple of things that are crucial, that are sort of crucial for any kind of intimate negotiation. Those of us who are sex educators or help people with safer sex conversations are pretty used to this. It also has to be the case that anybody can bail at any time for any reason. And that can feel really like, too much to like make a 2-week commitment, and then somebody still like has a slip up or something happens. But I've found that big groups of people have a really hard time maintaining a high standard of boundaries for long periods of time. You can have a bigger group of people if you have strict protocols for shorter periods of time, when you're going to see each other for shorter periods of time. And that can work, provided that everybody's on board. It's really helpful to get clear about what the agreements are, which we'll talk about in the class, and how to actually keep your shit on lockdown, as it were. But that being said, I was able to have a 24-hour pot up with a couple that I'm really, really good friends with. That, we've been socially distanced. We've been going for walks with masks and keeping our distance for the previous 6 months. And then we were able, last 6 weeks ago, we had a window of 24 hours where we're like, wait a minute, there's nothing on either side of us for 2 weeks, because some circumstances had changed. And so it was just the four of us that were able to have a situation. So it is doable, but there's a lot of stuff about communication, a lot of stuff about consent, and a lot of stuff about harm reduction that's really helpful to know. And that's what we'll be talking about.
Sure. No, and I appreciate like the ideas of, so for everybody who's watching, like part of the reason I got good at these things was Marcia and I started Cuddle Party together way back in 2004. And you want Marcia's brain, like you want to be Vulcan mind melding with Marcia, because what seeps out of Marcia's brain tends to be like really good shit, like good stuff. And part of the thing is like hanging out with people who are doing the tedious conversations, doing the research, nerding out, and like hanging out with people who are practicing or like trying to figure things out, and then having the conversations, like we can all help each other shorten our learning curves and normalize things that feel uncomfortable, right? So if you have, for the folks who are listening, like if you're having challenges with these conversations, or how to even start thinking about it, or also you might have friends or loved ones who are challenged, like going to a workshop, like this is one of the powers of workshops right now, especially online, is like, you don't have to leave your house. Do you remember leaving your house, Marcia? Do you remember that?
I remember going places, but now I just go to the park.
Yeah. But so the idea of like experiencing things that will start to normalize tough situations, and shorten your learning curve, and to be able to, and this is online, the silver lining is, because so many people are flocking to online learning, for some of us, we can tackle more, nervous making content, because we don't have to leave our homes. Like you can kind of like be in your weighted blanket or in your comfy socks,
watching
what you need to watch. And if it gets too much, you hit pause, because a lot of workshops are being recorded, so you have access to them after. This will be one that's being recorded, so you can like hit watch and pause as much as you need to start like not indoctrinating, that's the wrong word, but like exposing yourself in comfortable ways to these new ideas, to give yourself time and your loved ones time to think about these things. And then the beauty is you get to talk about like, oh, well, what do you think about what Marcia talked about?
Yeah.
And then what do you think about this? And look at this question on the worksheet or the download or this or that. So you get to kind of talk about negotiating
Right.
without actually negotiating.
Yeah, it gets to be a bit of a meta conversation.
And you get to kind of slowly baby step your way into it, because these things are complex, and there's a ripple effect and layers to, like, okay, we're all good to go, but like your roommate is vetoing this situation
Right.
because your roommate has a right to say, like, this affects me, like we're sharing
Yeah.
airspace
Yeah.
and all that.
And I think that's also one of the really challenging things about certainly for a lot of the people I've talked with, is that the people who live in places where real estate is cheap, this may not affect you as much, but those of us who live in places where real estate is expensive, a lot of us have housemates who are people we live with, and they're fine, but they're not necessarily our closest kin or family, or the people that we would prioritize ordinarily. And now all of a sudden, because we share the air we breathe, we have to prioritize the people we live with. And I've got a lot of creative solutions for housemate situations that I've been working on, and some of those require throwing some resources at it. But that's not, money is not always the answer. That's one thing I have learned. Like, it is helpful if you have an emergency fund that you can tap into to, like, make changes as needed in your living situation. But not everybody has that. So we've been looking at, like, how can house sitting and dog sitting, and get taking care, like seeing who of your friends has a yurt out back, or like camps, like any of these kinds of things. Going camping was something that was kind of making opportunities available for people this summer. Does somebody have an Airstream in their backyard that if you need to get some alone time, or not, have some autonomy for a little while, even if you are coming back, like having that kind of tapping into community resources and seeing what's available. I know that the Bay Area tends to be a little bit more inclined that way than other places, but this is, you'd be surprised how many people you don't even realize, like, they have a family cabin in the woods that nobody's staying in.
Yeah.
And they'd be
And
happy to let you stay there for a couple weeks.
And you wouldn't think to ask those kinds of things. Which again is why, like, talking to people, like, how are you doing it? Like, what's worked for you? What hasn't worked? That can be so useful, because somebody might have an idea you hadn't considered, that you're like, oh shit, like my uncle does have, an Airstream or something like that. And like, so talking about it is important. Talking about how normalizing the talk, so you can start to relax.
Right.
So that your reptile survival brains aren't all on high alert, because for me, that's when I tend to then be able to access my creativity and kind of think outside the box.
Yes.
So it's not like I have my adrenaline cortisol blinders on.
Right.
And that's been, so sometimes, like, you do have inspiration, but that doesn't tend to come when everyone's feeling, super in danger.
That's one of the things I'll be emphasizing in the class a lot is write things down, because when you're trying to remember it all and then you forget something, that stress response can happen. And having like shared Google Docs, or have a whiteboard. We have a whiteboard in our living room and a calendar that we keep track of everything. And our pod configuration has changed over time with buffers, and it's always still pretty small. It's usually under 6 people. Sometimes it's as little as 2 people. So I'm definitely not advocating for any kind of big group get-togethers. That is definitely the more people you include, the infinitely more complex it gets, and the stakes are really high for this. So I just want to be clear. This is not a class if you're like, I want to figure out how to get my 25 family members together. Probably you'll get some tools, but I given that everything I've looked at basically says the risk on that is pretty high, and the more people you have, the more likely slip-ups are to happen that people don't even realize are slip-ups. One of the things I'll be talking about is how to plan for failure, and how to build like multiple barriers in your plan, so that if there's a screw up here, there's something else that might catch it later. Catch the screw up, not catch COVID. So yeah, I mean, it's I think really important to let me just say it this way. Everyone's risk assessment of this is going to be a little bit different. Like if you're immune compromised and your partner has asthma, you're going to probably be evaluating your risk on this a little differently than people who are
Yeah.
just trying to not get it. And, you know, if you're in that kind of the first situation, like you might not go into the store at all. You may not
Mm-hmm.
be able to even think about risking having another person come into your bubble. But if you're somebody who is just like me, who is like really trying to not get it, I do have somebody over 65 in my pod that we're trying, you know, we have an older person that we really don't want him to get it. So we have
Mm-hmm.
another person in our pod who's immune compromised. There is some buffer between me and that person, those two people, because we're in different households, but we've been potted up. You know, I feel very strongly about, you know, it would be bad enough if I got it, and I really don't want this thing. My cousin's had it and he's had a really rough time with it. I really, really, really don't want to give it to somebody else, especially somebody who's
Mm-hmm.
immune compromised. So I am,
Yeah.
just to be clear, like where I'm coming from, like I'm not coming from like a totally locked down, never leaving the house, not going to the grocery store perspective. Although we will be talking about how to allow for that. But I'm also really not talking about anything big, adventurous, and a lot of the things I'm going to talk about is how to do it really slowly, how to get
Mm-hmm.
really clear on what you're willing to let go of.
Yeah.
I'm in a conversation right now about the holidays that may involve celebrating Christmas in January because we have to have the time buffer, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and that's going to be a really crucial thing. So getting clear, like, is it important to be together on the day? If so, you
Yeah.
might not have more than one person. But if you want to have like 3 people, maybe you do it on January 15th because that gives people
Yeah.
enough time. So yeah, anyway, that's kind of detailed, but you know, the risk evaluation, how do you assess your risk tolerance? How do you assess other people's risk tolerance?
Mm-hmm.
And then also recognizing that if it's different, that doesn't mean someone's wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important to remember, that just because you think it's not that big of a deal, I don't have to make you wrong. We just have to get on the same page about how we're staying protected. And if that
Mm-hmm.
means we're not in a pod, then we're not in a pod.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
other ways to
And
stay connected. And I will be talking about other ways, like more creative ways than just Zoom or freezing your butt off in the backyard.
yeah, and I appreciate that too, because like, and to mention, like, not everybody lives in a place where it's going to get cold, but
Mm-hmm.
as it tends to get darker earlier, and
Mm-hmm.
it is more cold in a lot of places, you know, where I'm living up near Portland, Oregon, it's already starting to become the rainy season,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm already starving
Mm-hmm.
to connect in ways that I, you know, my tanks are low.
Right.
So like, I appreciate you doing this class now before it's like winter,
Right.
because something I've noticed is it's kind of like going food shopping hungry. Like, unless you really, like, I know I can't sense how my needs have shifted, because I'm like looking at my own eyeballs from the inside. Like,
Yeah.
it just can't, it's hard to track that.
Yeah.
So, but I'm aware that I'm probably, oh, this feels emotionally right. I probably started to slide a little. I'm a little bit more slippery.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are a little more slippery right now. So what I'm hoping is that people can get both, like, start look at it from the perspective of, wait, there are more options than I thought that are safe,
Yeah.
and I need to be more rigorous than my emotional state wants me to be. And I'm hoping that the
Rigor.
two of those will help us to come
Yeah.
up with a nice little slice that there's like, oh, okay, there's a solution that works for my
Hmm.
situation in the middle there.
Yeah. And now I want to make a joke about, like, and that's called adulting, which means you get to do adult things sometimes. And
Yeah.
that's fun. What so I'll drop the links in on Instagram and also on Facebook. Where can people find you? Because now we just might as well tell them, go get tickets if you can get tickets.
Yeah.
Class is being recorded, so you can watch it over.
Mhm.
If you can't be
And if
there in
I will
person.
say too, I mean, this is definitely self-interested, but it's not entirely self-interested.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you are negotiating something with family, with friends, with housemates, with lovers, with your polypod, like, buy tickets, watch it together, like, get everybody involved. There's discounts available for people who've been impacted by COVID economically. So
Mm-hmm.
just go to the thing, and you can scoop up a batch of tickets if you need to. And I
Do
encourage
it.
you to do, you know, if there's people that you're trying to have these conversations with, take the class together, because it'll give you all something to work from together.
Yeah. Yeah, take a night off from watching Schitt's Creek or
Yeah.
Dahmer or The Good Place or whatever you're trying to binge watch right now.
Yeah.
We'll all see you on Thursday. Get your quarantine to stop watching, Game of Thrones the third time, and then you can all talk about things
Yeah.
after.
Yeah.
Um, just thanks. I'm
Yeah.
excited for Thursday if it's not apparent, everyone.
Yeah, you can
And I
find me on
really
all the
appreciate
social
it.
media at Ask Marcia B, AskMarcia, letter B. And
Yep.
yeah, the links are all on all of those. But yeah, thanks for having me, Reed. I feel really excited for this. Like this is new content and yet not. I mean, I started my career as a sex educator doing HIV prevention, and so in some
Mm-hmm.
ways these are the same conversations. The vectors for transmission are different, but the
Mm-hmm.
emotional charge of how do I have these needs I want to get met. It feels really vulnerable to talk about it. I don't feel very skilled in like advocating for myself or setting boundaries, and yet there's this thing I want, and that tendency towards either being slippery, like you were talking about, or towards self-abandonment of like, oh, I don't want to rock the boat. I'll just go along with what everybody else wants, even though it doesn't feel good to me. Um,
Guilty. Like,
yeah, I mean,
that's the first thing that goes out in the window. It's like, don't upset the people you love. And
yeah,
I do that a lot. And that's not, it's human. It's not the healthiest quality, but at least I know I do that.
right.
But it still doesn't mean I'm not doing it.
Right. And when,
And
the stakes are higher right now around that, there's like real consequences to doing that. And it's emotionally challenging. Like I'm not going to promise that it'll solve everything, but my goal for the class is that you'll come out of it with some scripts and some templates and some checklists so that it makes the conversations easier. You'll know how to map out your pod, including the parts of your pod that you may not be seeing. uh, for those of you who have like coworkers and are still having to go into your jobs and things like that. So I'll try to cover a lot of scenarios. The other thing I will say is if you sign up ahead of time, which I encourage you to do, there is a place where you can drop your questions in, and if you drop your questions in advance, so it's a 90-minute class with a 30-minute Q&A, but I'm going to be trying to address the questions during the class that come in ahead of time. So if you have something you really, really want me to cover, sign up now and get your questions in early, and I'll do my best.
got it. Okay. Yeah. And folks, if you're worried about money, Marsha already said there's options for those who are financially wobbly right now.
Yeah.
So please share these videos, tell your friends. We'll see you on Thursday.
Yeah.
Any last words?
Thanks for caring. Thanks for trying to keep your community safe. Thanks for trying to keep yourself safe. Things are really, really hard right now. And I feel like the more we can just support each other with resources and sharing tools and being patient and like valuing the fact that we do have needs and we do have to figure out how to get them met. It's just, it's a big learning curve, but it's a good learning curve that'll serve us in the after times, I'm hoping, as well.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right.
All right. Bye, everyone. Share
Thanks,
the video.
everyone.
And Marsha, thanks for popping my IG live
Yeah.
and Facebook live cherry at the same
Thanks for
time.
watching, everybody. Thanks for being
All right.
patient at the beginning.
I'm turning all the things off. Bye.
Bye.